A 26-year-old man named Homer B. Lawyer Jr. left the store where he worked as a shoe salesman in Miami, Florida for his lunch break, and he walked down the street. He tried not to rush or look like he was in a hurry, but the truth was, he was extremely antsy as he walked along here. And the reason for that is he knew that soon he would either be rich or in jail. Because Homer was actually on his way to rob his very first bank. So Homer had decided that he was done being a shoe salesman. He didn't make nearly enough money, and it was just so boring. I mean, every single day felt the same, and again, there's like no money in it. And so for the last couple of weeks, Homer had been trying to think of a way to make lots of money really quickly that might also be kind of exciting along the way. Hence how he landed on robbing a bank. And it just so happened there was a bank right around the corner from his work that he decided would be his first target. Now, Homer was aware that he was brand new to robbing banks here, so, before he actually stepped out to go do this thing, he'd put a lot of thought into how to actually do it. He'd spent days preparing for this by mulling over and scribbling down ideas and plans until he'd finally landed on what he felt was the best way to pull this thing off. And so now, as he rounded the corner and he saw the bank up ahead, his stomach fluttered with nerves, but he took a breath and told himself that he had a solid plan in place, and the risk was definitely going to be worth the reward. Seconds later, Homer walked into the mostly empty bank with one hand in his pocket. He had a finger stretched out so that it looked like he had a weapon in his pocket, a gun. But he was not armed. He was just hoping to fool people into thinking he was armed. And so with his hand conspicuously located in his pocket, he headed over to the short line where one other customer was at the counter being helped by the only bank teller on duty. And so Homer, doing his best to stay calm, he waited his turn. And then when the other customer was done and had left the bank, Homer walked up to the teller and handed her a note that said he had a gun and he was robbing this bank. And now she just needed to give him all the cash in her register. Homer watched as the teller read this note and then got this terrified look on her face, like it suddenly sunk in what was happening here. Then, as calmly as she could, because now she was really frightened and very on edge, she set the note aside, and then with shaking hands, she unlocked a drawer and began pulling out all these stacks of bills from inside of it. And then when she was done pulling all this cash out, she put it into a bag and then slid the bag over to Homer. And for a second, Homer just stared at this bag. At first he was just totally thrilled that his plan had even worked here. He was confident, but this is amazing. I can't believe this is going so well. But he quickly snapped out of his, elation here, and he realized that, the bank robbery is far from over here. Like right now, he needs to take this money and get out of here as fast as he can. So he grabbed the bag with his free hand. He's still got the other hand in his pocket, pretending there's a gun there. He grabs the bag, he turns, and he sprints out of the bank. And as soon as he was outside, he just kept on running until he was a few blocks away. And at that point, he stopped and he turned around to look and to listen. But amazingly, there weren't any police following him, or he didn't see any. And there weren't any sirens in the distance. And so Homer relaxed because he knew he was safe and that he'd been right to give robbing banks a try. He was a natural. And now there was no way he'd be going back to his boring shoe sales job ever again. The next day, when Homer woke up, he felt the best he had ever felt in his life. This successful robbery was like the best thing he had ever done. And so with a big grin on his face, he decided he would leave his house and he would head out and treat himself to a nice, expensive breakfast, and maybe then after that, go spend some more of that new hard-earned money on whatever he wanted, because he was rich now. So with a pep in his step, he walked around the house, he got himself dressed and ready to go, and then he headed out the front door, out onto the street. But as soon as he did, he found himself completely surrounded by a swarm of Miami police officers and FBI agents. So it would turn out, somewhat unbelievably, that Homer was not actually a natural at robbing banks. He had robbed a bank in broad daylight, close to his work, and without even wearing a mask or any sort of disguise. He had just sort of gone in there and done it. And while those are all things that could have gotten him caught, and likely would have gotten him caught, the actual reason he got caught so quickly after the robbery was because of one very avoidable and truly just completely idiotic mistake that he made. So when Homer fled the bank, he was so intent on getting out of there as fast as he could that he had forgotten to grab the note that he had given to the teller with him. He had left it on the counter. That note had been written on the back of some scrap paper that Homer had been using in the days prior to the robbery to scribble down all his ideas and thoughts about the robbery. And one of the things that Homer, in all his thoroughness, had written down on that scrap piece of paper included his own extremely distinctive name. So, when the investigators arrived at the bank to take the teller's statement, the one who was actually robbed by Homer, and try to collect some evidence, the bank teller literally just handed them that note with the robber's full name on it, and also clearly their intention to come and rob this bank. Like, it was basically, my name is Homer and I'm gonna rob this bank, here's how I'm gonna do it. Like, that's what he gave the teller, in essence. And so using that note, the police located Homer pretty much immediately and arrested him. Our next story is called The Destiny Ring. On an afternoon in early June of 1938, a 21-year-old actor named Jack Dunn paced nervously around the lobby of a film studio in Los Angeles, California, waiting to be called into the next room. Jack was incredibly anxious, and as he paced around, he kept stopping in front of this mirror to adjust his outfit and fiddle with the ring on his finger. So Jack was actually being considered for a lead role in a major motion picture, and he was about to do this one final audition. This one would be on camera, to prove to the film's producers that he was the guy for the job and not the others. And this was a job that Jack not only wanted, but he desperately needed it. Even though Jack was young, he had been trying to make it as an actor out here in Hollywood for years, but everything he'd auditioned for or had actually been cast in had invariably fallen through. So he hadn't actually been in a movie yet. And so he was starting to feel like if he didn't get a big break soon, he would literally just run out of money, and then he'd have to go back to England where he was from. But if he got this part, the one he was auditioning for today, there was no question in his mind that it would launch him not just into a viable career out here in Hollywood, but perhaps superstardom. Because this film was a biopic about the life of this Italian actor, Rudolph Valentino, who was a massive movie star from the 1920s who'd had millions and millions of obsessive fans. And he was considered at the time to be like the biggest sex symbol in Hollywood. Now, Rudolph had unfortunately died young and sort of unexpectedly at just 31 years old from this sudden illness. But his sudden passing had actually made him even more legendary and more beloved. So this was like a very iconic film to be involved with. Now, Jack had never met or gotten to know Rudolph, but from what he'd heard about him, they had a lot in common. They were both tall, dark, and handsome, and they were both immigrants and accomplished athletes. Jack had been an ice skater, and Rudolph had been a dancer. Now, Jack hoped the producers also could see these similarities as well. But he knew even if they did, that still wouldn't be enough to get him the part. Rudolph was singular and special, and so Jack really needed to actually become him if he wanted a shot at this role. So today, for the screen test, Jack had dressed up like Rudolph and put on a very expensive, flashy outfit, since that's the kind of thing that Rudolph liked to wear. And Jack had even gone one step further and managed to get a hold of this vintage ring that Rudolph himself had actually owned. It had this huge yellow stone and this really ornate platinum setting. And apparently, at some point in the history of this ring, in part because Rudolph had owned it, it had gotten this sort of over-the-top nickname. It was called the Destiny Ring. And now, Jack hoped that by wearing this Destiny Ring, that it would help him sort of get the role that he felt destined to play. And so now, as he looked into the mirror for the umpteenth time and checked his hair and his outfit, he heard the door open and the producer's voice called out, asking if Jack was ready. Jack took one last deep breath and then silently told himself that once he walked out of this lobby, he was no longer Jack Dunn. he was Rudolph Valentino. Then he straightened his shoulders, he adjusted his destiny ring, and followed the producer through the doorway. And wouldn't you know it, just a few days later, almost every paper in Hollywood had a new headline. Newcomer Jack Dunn has been cast as the icon Rudolph Valentino. He got the part. At the end of June, so now about 2 weeks after Jack officially got the part, he was out in the California desert, less than 100 miles from Los Angeles, and he was carrying a rifle through some brush. So ever since Jack had been officially cast as Rudolph, his life had become a whirlwind. The movie was set to shoot in the fall, but he was already getting a ton of attention and lots of press about his casting. However, to Jack's surprise, a lot of this attention was pretty negative. The media seemed to think that Jack himself was just too inexperienced to handle playing someone as famous and iconic as Rudolph. And also, Jack had received literally thousands of letters from Rudolph's fans who had basically said the same thing, only more rudely. Now, Jack had always coveted, the life of famous actors and actresses who were in the public eye, but he had never been in the public eye. And so this criticism had been really hard to hear, like he wasn't used to this. But the criticism had also made him want to prove the naysayers wrong here. So ever since getting cast, Jack had been working even harder on this role. Like he had really tried to become Rudolph Valentino, to really show that he could do this. And so after being cast, he just kept on dressing like Rudolph. He'd used Rudolph's dance moves at clubs and actually invented a dance that he called the Valentino Rumba. He'd also started dating around, sort of seeing a bunch of women all the time, just like apparently Rudolph had. Like he was trying to really be this guy. And today, sort of in keeping with this trend, Jack had come all the way out here to the desert to hunt, which had been a hobby of Rudolph's. And so Jack, he's trudging across the desert landscape, trying to act like this hardened hunter that he really wasn't. And at some point, he looked down at his hand, and he saw there was a tick that was actually on his hand near where his destiny ring was. Now, the tick had not bit him yet, and so quickly, Jack squeezed his hand and crushed it with his thumb against Rudolph's destiny ring. Fast forward a few days. Jack has now come back home. He's back to fully pretending to be Rudolph, and he's getting ready to shoot that fall. Like he's doing all the things he's supposed to be doing, but he started to feel like he was having a hard time being able to focus. Like it was like every time he tried to work, it's like his mind would just wander. And he started to realize what was going on here is he was getting sick. He could sort of feel it coming on. And then shortly after that, one of his eyes got really swollen and his throat became raw. And then he had this really bad fever. And then not long after that, he became completely delirious, like just out of his mind. And so it was around this time where it's like Jack is losing touch with reality that he knew, his acting career really needed to be set aside. For now, he needed to go to the hospital. And so Jack, he goes to the hospital, and as soon as he is admitted, his condition only got worse. Like no matter what they did, it's like they could not stop whatever was happening to him. And he declined really quickly, to the point where it was clear Jack's body was shutting down. And even though the doctors, the nurses, the staff did everything they could to try to save him, about a week after being admitted to the hospital, he died. So when Jack was out hunting, doing his best Rudolph impersonation, well, that tick that he saw on his hand that he ultimately killed by crushing against the destiny ring, well, he was smart to kill it because it was infected with this rare illness called tularemia. And it had not bit him yet, so it was like he saved himself by crushing this tick, right? Except later that day, like after he got back, he rubbed his eye with his fist and his destiny ring, and the guts of that tick and this disease were still on the ring. And so he basically rubbed it directly into his eyeball, and then it got into his bloodstream, and that literally killed him. And so in a weird way, that destiny ring, which had become such a part of Jack's identity as he took on this persona as Rudolph, it's like the ring kinda is the reason he died. Like the ring is the mechanism by which he got this disease. But it actually goes much deeper. So the Destiny Ring was famous not just because Rudolph Valentino had at one time owned it, but also because the Destiny Ring was said to be cursed. Specifically, that the owner of the ring, the possessor of this Destiny Ring, could potentially be killed. Basically, the curse could kill them. And so it's very likely that Rudolph Valentino was aware of the lore behind this ring because he was known to collect superstitious objects. He didn't believe in things like curses, but he really liked things that had sort of scary lore around them. And so he very likely bought this ring in part because it was cursed. But then he dies this sudden, tragic death when he's really young while wearing this ring. And it only added to the lore of this ring. And then from there, the ring did not go directly to Jack Dunn. No, there were three people in the middle. There was a radio star, a singer, and a burglar who all possessed this ring following Rudolph. And each of them, while wearing the ring, died sudden, unexpected deaths. And then finally, the ring winds up on Jack Dunn's finger, who's playing the role of Rudolph Valentino, and he too would die a sudden, unexpected, tragic death young while wearing the Destiny Ring. Since Jack Dunn's death, the Destiny Ring has seemingly disappeared, and nobody knows who has it now, or whether they know about the curse. Our next story is called Striking It Rich. One afternoon in the summer of 1909, a man named Andrew Dunn knelt inside of a wooden shack just outside the very remote town of Gowgonda, Canada, taking sticks of dynamite out of a crate. And Andrew was really excited because he was about to use this dynamite to get at this huge deposit of silver that would make him and his team very rich. So Andrew was a miner, and up until recently, he'd been living in this town called Cobalt, which was about 100 miles east of where they were right now, and was famous for its very lucrative silver mines. Andrew had made a ton of money there, but recently, Cobalt had been overrun by other miners also trying to get rich. So Andrew and two of his friends from Cobalt had come out to this more remote area where they'd been able to find these new, untouched silver deposits. And this one that they had just found would be their biggest haul so far. And so, very excitedly, Andrew continues pulling out all this dynamite until he has enough, at which point he scoops it all up, and he leaves the shack, and he walks over to where his partners are standing in front of all these huge rocks that they're gonna blow up to get to the silver. And so he goes over and he hands out the dynamite, and they place them strategically in the rocks and tether them all together to a single fuse. And then when they're ready, they light the lead fuse that would burn into all the dynamite. So they have a little bit of a lead time here. They light the fuse and they all turn and they run over to the shack where they're gonna take cover. They get inside, they're behind the wall, they crouch down and they're waiting and they're waiting. And it's gonna be a minute before it explodes. But as they're waiting, Andrew hears something outside the shack. And immediately it prompts him to just peek out the window just to see what it is, because he knows he's got a little bit of time before this detonates. Then he looks out the window, and specifically he looks down at what's right outside the window, and he can't believe what he's looking at. But it was already too late. So it would turn out Andrew, despite being really excited about being in this new area to get to the silver, that was all true, but also Andrew was a big family man. And it was really hard for him to be so far away from his family. He would get homesick. And so to combat the homesickness for this trip, he had brought with him his beloved dog for company. And this dog was so loyal, it basically followed him everywhere. It kept things light at camp. It was like this great dog. Everybody loved the dog. And on this day, after lighting the fuse and sort of putting the dynamite down, the lit dynamite, they run back over to the shack. And Andrew, he thinks his dog is with him, that the dog has run with them as he has in the past into the shack with him. But when he's crouched down in the shack, he realizes he can't see his dog. The dog's not in the shack. He panics for a second, then he thinks he hears the dog. He looks out the window, and there's his dog. And what has the dog done? it's begun to play its favorite game, fetch. He saw Andrew put that stick of dynamite down after lighting it, and the dog thought that was the beginning of a game of fetch. And so as soon as they had bolted and ran back to the shed, the dog had scooped up one of those lit sticks of dynamite and ran it right back over and dropped it right outside the shack. And the dog's looking up at Andrew. Andrew looks out the window, sees the stick of dynamite, sees the dog. The dog's stoked, turns and runs off, ready for his master to throw this stick to him. But after the dog ran off into the distance, there was nowhere for Andrew or his partners to go. They were trapped. And so the dynamite exploded, ultimately killing Andrew and horribly maiming his partners. And as for the dog, who had playfully run off, totally unharmed. The fourth and final story of today's episode is called Overworked. Around 7 a.m. on August 22, 1913, a 21-year-old businessman named Abraham Wells Boyd Jr. quietly got dressed in his bedroom in Chattanooga, Tennessee. On the bed just behind him was his wife and their 2-year-old son, who were fast asleep. And as Abraham watched them, the two things that he treasured most in the world, he couldn't help but feel unbearably sad. Because these days, he was never home when his family was actually awake. So Abraham was a part owner of an automobile racetrack that was currently under construction. Now, this construction project was supposed to be a huge step forward in his career, and he was supposed to make a ton of money once the track was open again. But for right now, Abraham felt like this construction project was kind of like a nightmare. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, like in the future, this is going to make me a lot of money, but it was like the project is enormous, it's expensive, and it also means he's not earning money while he's putting money into doing the project. And then on top of all that, he had this huge issue with thieves. Thieves were breaking into the construction site and stealing lumber. And because of these thefts, in addition to all the costs Abraham was incurring just to do the construction, he had also had to hire a full-time security guard. But then last night, the security guard hadn't shown up on time, and so Abraham's the guy, the part owner of this place, who's stepping in as a security guard, staying up all night, doing a job he has no idea how to do, like, pretending to be a security guard. And now he's back home and he's exhausted and he can't just go to bed. He has to go back out to work. But before he could go to work, he had to take some equipment that he had accidentally taken with him from his shift as the security guard. He had brought something home he wasn't supposed to. He had to go drop that off. Then he had to go back to work. It's like his whole life is a mess right now, and all he wants is this stupid project to be over so he can start earning real money again and can see his family in the daytime hours. But it just felt like that was eons away. So with one more glance over at his wife and kid, who he wished he could just crawl in bed with, Abraham sighed and began gathering up all the things he would need for work that day. His briefcase, some paperwork, and also that equipment that he had to return to the job site, and then also his coat and his hat. And then at some point, as he was doing this, Abraham's wife woke up, which Abraham was very happy about. He wanted to talk to her, but he felt bad waking her up, and so she gets up, and they talk for a minute, and she helps him finish getting ready, and then after saying bye to her, Abraham went over to the bed to bend over and say goodnight to his son before he left. I mean, in some ways, his son was like the reason he was putting up with all of this. Like it was to give he and his wife's child the best life he possibly could. And so he goes over and he bends over and he gives the kid a kiss. However, as he bent over to give his son a kiss, there was this sudden, really loud noise coming from somewhere. It was like off to the side of Abraham, or at least it felt like it was over here. And it's so loud that Abraham actually jumped up. It startled him, and he noticed his son, who had been soundly sleeping, also, is now awake and crying, like it's sort of madness in the room. But Abraham has no idea what this noise was or where it came from. Abraham's wife, who had sort of been off to the side of the room at this point, she rushes over because obviously she's heard the sound, she sees the commotion, she's totally bewildered, and she's asking her husband what's going on. And Abraham was about to reply to her that he had no idea, but all of a sudden he started feeling really dizzy and really hot. He took off his coat and he tried to balance himself against the dresser, but his vision started to get really blurry, and then his legs gave out, and the next thing he knew, he had crumpled to the ground and was lying on his back on the floor. So it would turn out that Abraham filling in for that security guard who missed his shift that night, suddenly Abraham's up all night being the security guard. Even though that specific example only happened one time, it was like across this whole construction project, there were always so many problems that seemed to all fall in Abraham's lap. And so he was constantly overextending himself and pulling overtime shifts and doing things that he wasn't even getting paid to do. It was like his mind and his energy and everything was being spread across every single place in his life. He was just totally, completely burned out. And for the most part, this really only affected Abraham. He just sort of felt really run down all the time. But on the night of the loud sound in the room, well, his overextension of himself, his total exhaustion, had put him and his whole family in danger. So the equipment that Abraham had accidentally taken home with him from having been a fill-in security guard the night before, well, it was a gun, because he had been a security guard, borrowing someone's gun in order to be the security guard. And then he had brought it home with him. And that morning, as Abraham is looking at his wife and son and just sort of run down, like he was especially groggy, and he was not a gun owner himself, so he didn't have really any experience handling a loaded weapon. So even though he had put the gun in its holster, he hadn't actually fastened it in. So it's not locked in there, it's just sitting in the holster. So when he bent down to give his son a kiss, the pistol had slipped out of the holster, hit the floor, and went off, firing a single round into Abraham's chest. Abraham, unfortunately, died of his injuries. On the evening of December 29, 1986, a California Highway Patrol officer named Craig Pyre drove his cruiser down Interstate 15 in San Diego, California. With him was an NBC News reporter in the back seat, and there was a cameraman in the passenger seat. They were filming a segment about highway travel safety that was set to air on the evening news later that night. Officer Pyre was following his typical patrol route, but after a few minutes, they passed by a sign that said Mercy Road. It was an exit, and at that point, Officer Pyre turned to the news team, pointed at Mercy Road, and said, "That's where they found the body." So a little more than 36 hours earlier, at around 4 a.m. the previous morning, a 20-year-old college student named Kara Knott had been found strangled to death in a creek right near the Mercy Road exit. Kara had been on her way home from her boyfriend's house when, for whatever reason, maybe car troubles or maybe she was trying to help someone, but she wound up in that cul-de-sac, and then while she was there, she clearly encountered someone dangerous who took her life. And so this was actually why the California Highway Patrol and NBC News were collaborating on this news segment, because Kara's killer was still not caught. And so the idea behind this segment was basically to tell drivers along this highway, how to stay safe while they were out there, especially if for whatever reason they had to stop somewhere along the highway, what to do in that situation. And so as Officer Pyre passed by the Mercy Road exit and continued down Interstate 15, he turned to the news crew, and as they filmed, he began talking about the basics of highway travel safety. Specifically, he said, look, one of the most hazardous things that can happen to you beyond an accident on the highway is if you have some sort of car trouble that forces you to stop on the highway. Because once you stop, there's an inclination for a lot of people to want to leave their vehicle. But that's a very dangerous thing to do. Officer Pyre also warned people not to get into a stranger's car, because there was a running theory at this point that perhaps Kara had gotten into her killer's car. As this particular segment was filmed, Officer Pyre was looking ahead, and he noticed there was a car pulled over on the shoulder of the highway with its hazards on. So he turned to the news crew and basically said, look, here's a chance for us to actually show the people in real time what to do in case your car breaks down on the highway. So he pulled his cruiser over right behind the stalled car, he got out, and then gestured for the news crew to come with him. Officer Pyre walked over to the passenger side door of this car, and through the open window, he asked the driver to get out and talk to him. The driver did, and as the camera rolled, Officer Pyre asked him to explain, what's going on here, what happened to your car. The driver said he had run out of gas and then gotten stranded on the side of the road. And then he had left his car and walked to a gas station to get a gas can, came all the way back, he put the gas into his car, but his car still wouldn't start. Now, at this point, Officer Pyre is realizing that this driver is doing basically exactly what he shouldn't be doing, according to the safety tips Officer Pyre had given. And so on camera, he basically says to this guy, "Do you understand how dangerous it is to have left your car like that and walked alone on this highway? Do you understand what a hazard that is?" And the driver just kind of looked at him and shrugged like, "Yeah, I guess so." After that, Officer Pyre called the man a tow truck. His car was towed and the man was on his way. And Officer Pyre got back into the cruiser with the news crew and they carried on. After that, Officer Pyre and the news crew wrapped up filming, and then after he dropped them back off again, they told him what time to expect his segment to air on NBC that night. And sure enough, that evening, Officer Pyre was in front of a TV as the broadcast started. And when Officer Pyre's actual segment aired on TV, to him and to the California Highway Patrol, it went great. It was a minute and a half long. It sort of hit all the high points. It showed Officer Pyre, talking about how to be safe on the highway and talking to the stranded motorist. It kind of did exactly what they expected it to do. And when it was over, Officer Pyre clicked off the TV and didn't think much about it because it was not a big deal. It was just a basic safety video. And for the vast majority of other people who watched this clip live on TV, it really didn't stand out to them. Again, it was just kind of a routine police safety video. But there were a few people, when they watched this clip, that noticed something very specific. And within an hour of this clip airing on TV, those few people were calling the police in droves to tell them, "We know what happened to Kara Knott." And the police would follow up on these tips, and sure enough, just over 2 weeks later, they had gathered enough evidence that they were able to arrest Kara Knott's killer. It would turn out all the clues the police needed to solve the Kara Knott murder case were right there in that 1.5 minute long video. Because what happened to Kara had almost happened to over 24 other women in San Diego. And those young women were the ones who saw the news segment when it happened live, and they noticed this particular detail that clearly telegraphed who Kara's killer was. They were the ones who called police. On the night of Kara's murder, December 27, 1986, she pulled off Interstate 15 on the Mercy Road exit and she came to a stop in that cul-de-sac. Now, we don't know exactly why she came to a stop in there, but either way, she was there, and that's where she encountered her killer. Now, the other 24 women who encountered the same person, the killer, they were terrorized and kind of tortured and held hostage for a couple of hours, but eventually were let go. But Kara wasn't. During her encounter, at some point, the killer clubbed her over the head and then strangled her to death with a rope. Now, the killer at first had gotten away with this until they were featured on that 1.5 minute long video. And some of those women who had survived their attack, they're watching the segment and suddenly their attacker is on TV. Now, they had previously reported their attack to police, but to this point, nothing had been done. And now they're staring at, for sure, the person who attacked them, who's right on TV. And critically, as part of this segment, they're hearing about how this other young woman had been attacked and killed on this highway. And they're thinking, oh, this person did that to me. I barely got away. I bet they killed this girl. And on top of that, as they're watching the news, staring at their attacker, they can see there's a fresh cut over their eye. And so put that all together and they thought, boom, that's the person who killed Kara Knott. And sure enough, the police would follow up on these tips and they would confirm that the man in the video with the cut over his eyebrow was Kara's killer. And Kara's killer was none other than Officer Craig Pyre. Officer Pyre was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Since being incarcerated, he has gone up for parole 2 separate times and been rejected both times. However, he is up for parole again in 2027. Our next story is called The Woman in a Wrinkled Dress. On a late winter afternoon in 1985, a Canadian border security guard stood at the border between New York State and Ontario, Canada. And as he looked out at the dozens of cars lined up at his checkpoint, he felt an enormous amount of responsibility. Because for him, working at border security was not just about checking people's passports. It was also about making sure dangerous criminals from the United States did not flee their country and enter Canada. And today, there was one particular dangerous criminal from the United States that this guard was on high alert for, a 30-year-old man named Alex Mangle. A few days earlier, Alex Mangle had been stopped by a police officer near New York City. And during this traffic stop, Alex had somehow taken the police officer's gun and shot the officer in the head, killing them, and then Alex had fled and he was still on the run. And so now law enforcement was concerned that because New York was only 6 hours from the Canadian border, that it was very possible that Alex might try to flee into Canada to escape persecution. And so US and Canadian law enforcement and border security were on the lookout for Alex Mangle. And he was this 30-year-old white man with thinning brown hair and a wispy mustache. And so all day long, that Canadian border security guard looked very closely at every person who came through his checkpoint to see if they were Alex Mangle. He would see a family on their way to visit relatives in Canada. He would see a couple on their honeymoon. He would see a man with a car full of camping supplies and a middle-aged woman traveling alone and all these different people from all walks of life. But none of them looked anything like Alex Mangle. And so by the end of his shift, after checking dozens and dozens of cars and looking at every person, he felt certain that Alex Mangle had not slipped through his checkpoint. And so he clocked out and he went home. A few days later, on March 2nd, a police officer was patrolling this parking lot right outside of a shopping mall in Ontario, Canada, which was located about an hour and a half away from the border. And during his patrol, at some point, he noticed there was this one car, a white Toyota, that had been loitering in the area for quite a while. And so he decided to drive over and see what was going on. And when he got there, he looked inside the vehicle and he saw someone sitting on the passenger seat. And he was a white man, probably in his 30s, with thinning brown hair and a wispy mustache. And this officer immediately recognized this guy as being the wanted criminal, Alex Mangle. And so the officer immediately called for backup, and then he parked his car, got out, and approached the white Toyota where this guy was sitting with his gun drawn. And as the officer approached the passenger side door, the man inside turned, noticed the officer, jumped into the driver's seat, fired up the car, and the Toyota sped out of the parking lot. And so the officer, he jumps back in his cruiser and he takes off after him. And before long, it was like the entirety of the police force in Toronto was a part of this high-speed chase to catch this guy. And eventually they funneled the car into a dead-end street, and the white Toyota crashed into a stop sign, and then the man inside with the mustache and the thinning brown hair pops out, and immediately everybody sees, yep, that's Alex Mangle. He didn't put up a fight at that point. He was taken into custody. However, despite how relieved law enforcement was to have this cop killer in custody, they realized they didn't understand something. How was it that Alex Mangle got past border security and got into Canada? Everybody was on high alert looking for him. What happened? And so police were baffled until they searched that white Toyota Alex had been driving. On the night that Alex shot and killed that police officer near New York City, he immediately fled to this wooded area and hid out overnight. And then the next day, when he got up, he was walking around and he happened to pass by this commercial building. And as he was looking at it, he saw this middle-aged woman, whose name was Beverly Capone, come out of the building and make her way towards her car. And she was all alone. And so Alex walked up to her and abducted her at gunpoint. And then he drove her to this cabin out in the woods that he knew would be totally isolated. No one was there. And once they got there, he murdered her. And then once she was dead, he stole her clothes and put it on, and also cut off her face and her scalp and put those on as well. He was literally wearing her skin and hair. And he hopped in that white Toyota and he drove up to the Canadian border. And amazingly, he got through the checkpoint into Canada without anybody noticing. It would turn out that Canadian border security guard, who all day was checking for Alex Mangle, did actually see Alex Mangle. He just didn't recognize him because Alex Mangle was wearing Beverly Capone's face, hair, and clothes. And so he thought he was just a middle-aged woman traveling alone, and he let him on through. And so police would figure this whole thing out when they searched that white Toyota, because they would find lying on the floorboard was Beverly's dress, scalp, and face. Alex was deported back to the US, However, before he could stand trial, he attempted to escape a prison transport and in the process got shot to death by police. However, that was not the end of Alex's story. Following his death, officers continued to investigate him and also his property, and at some point during a search of his property, they would discover all these photos of unidentified women, along with these maps where these very isolated places in New York and Pennsylvania were circled, and nobody knows what they mean. Now, police have not conclusively linked Alex to any other murders, but he does remain a suspect in several cases, and in fact, many investigators believe Alex was actually a serial killer. However, we'll probably never know how many people Alex actually killed because he took all of his secrets to the grave. The next and final story of today's episode is called Striking a Discord. At 3:30 p.m. on July 27, 2019, a 22-year-old college student named Nicole logged onto her gaming computer in her bedroom in North Carolina. Nicole had spent the morning and the early part of the afternoon studying, but now she could finally kick back and relax and play her favorite video game, an online multiplayer combat game called Perfect World, where people battled each other as characters inspired by Chinese mythology. Perfect World was a pretty niche game, so not a whole lot of people played it or even knew about it. But Nicole loved it, and she played it basically every day for the past few years, was totally hooked on it, and in playing it, she had met about a dozen other people from all over the world who also were obsessed with this game. And together, they had formed a virtual community, and they used a messaging app called Discord to communicate with each other outside of the game. So, on this particular day, after Nicole loaded up Perfect World, she also opened up her Discord chat, and she saw already that several of her friends were online, and they were all talking on the general chat inside of their server. And so Nicole began perusing the messages, and she saw the general theme of the messages being passed was about one of the other users on their server, somebody who went by the username Menhaz. So as far as everyone knew on this Discord server, Menhaz, they didn't know his real name, was a college student, and he was basically known to be a huge troll, which meant he said and did really offensive things, in particular on this Discord server, just to get people's reactions. Because of his trolling behavior, he had actually been previously kicked out of the server and also kicked out of the game Perfect World, like the game they're all connected on this Discord server through. He had been booted from both of those platforms in the past, but in previous occasions when that happened, Menhaz would plead his case and say he's not going to do it anymore, he's going to behave, and eventually the moderators would just let him back in. And so currently, Menhaz was back on the Discord server and he was back to his trolling ways. But as Nicole scanned through the general chat and went back and actually saw what Menhaz had been saying that day that basically had stirred up everybody else on the server to say, look, he's back to his trolling ways, when she went back and actually saw what Menhaz was saying, Nicole couldn't help but feel like today's trolling just felt different. Menhaz was talking about this apparently brilliant 4-step plan he had that was going to completely revolutionize his life and basically set him up for big success in his life going forward. However, this plan he was talking about, this 4-step plan, was not only totally outrageous, but just seemed impossible. Like what he was saying he was going to do just didn't seem possible even by Menhaz's standards. Like within his trolling standards, this was a bridge too far. This isn't even trolling, this is just weird what you're proposing. And so basically the chatter on the Discord server this day that Nicole was seeing was how nobody believed this 4-step plan was a real thing. Like this is just classic Menhaz trolling. And Nicole too, she also did not believe this plan was serious. She did not think for a second Menhaz was going to do this. And so she just kind of rolled her eyes, ignored Menhaz, minimized the Discord server, and just enjoyed playing the game, Perfect World. And after a while, after a couple of battles that she won and a couple of battles that she lost in this game, she paused for a second and noticed there was a whole bunch of new notifications on their Discord server. And so because Nicole was already taking a break from the game, she opened up the Discord server to see what was going on. And right away she saw the main topic of discussion was once again Menhaz and his 4-step plan, but specifically, Menhaz had just sent a picture through the Discord server that apparently represented completing step 1 of this 4-step plan. He basically said, look, I did it. I've done 1. I'm on to step 2 now. And everybody's looking at this picture thinking, wait a minute, he's actually doing this? This can't be real. And Nicole, when she looked at this picture, she too thought like, no way, this is not possible. He did not do this. And in fact, our first thought was, okay, maybe this image was, created by AI or something, or, maybe he pulled this image off a website somewhere and is pretending it's authentic, but it can't possibly be something he actually took a picture of. He couldn't have done this. And so pretty quickly, Nicole, despite seeing this image, she agreed with the consensus that Menhaz is still just trolling us. This picture is not proof that he's really doing this 4-step plan. And so Nicole went back to playing Perfect World, and about an hour later, she noticed there were all sorts of new notifications on her Discord server. And so once again, she stopped her game, she opened up the Discord server, and once again, the entire chat was dominated about Menhaz, because Menhaz had sent a second picture, apparently representing him completing the second step of his big 4-step plan. And once again, everyone's saying there's no way, he's trolling us, this can't be real. And Nicole, she looked at the image itself, and she too thought this has got to be trolling. But now, she wasn't just filled with pure disbelief. She wasn't able to just completely discard what was happening here, because part of her was thinking, like, how is Menhaz getting these hyper-specific images that really are tethered to this exact plan he's laid out? Like, how does he have these images? Where are they coming from? Now, this was back in 2019, and certainly AI technology existed, but not the way it does now, where, the average user can literally in seconds create hyper-specific images using AI. In 2019, that really wasn't available to most people, and so really the only way Menhaz could potentially have these images, at least in Nicole's mind, was he had to have pulled them off some website somewhere and basically pretended they were images that he took. And so Nicole decided she was actually going to take the 2 images he had sent and reverse image search them to try to figure out where they came from, find the website, where he's pulling them from, because clearly these pictures are not authentic. There's no way Menhaz actually took these photos. But when Nicole reverse image searched both images, nothing came up. Now, Nicole thought, okay, that does seem to suggest these are authentic pictures he really did take, which maybe means he's actually doing this plan, even though that seemed totally preposterous. Or she thought maybe, these images have been pulled from such an obscure website somewhere that I don't have access to, finding them in a reverse image search, that maybe that's what it is. And so at this point, Nicole told herself, you know what, there's got to be a reasonable explanation for this, but I'll tell you this, it can't be that Menhaz is actually following through on this plan. It's not possible. And so once again, she minimized the Discord server and got back into the game. But pretty quickly, Nicole just stopped playing the game because her mind was totally fixated on whatever was going on with Menhaz. And so she opened up the Discord server again, and she saw still everybody in the chat was talking about Menhaz and these 2 pictures he had sent. And basically the server was divided. About half the members believed this really was just Menhaz trolling, and the other half was starting to think that, hey guys, this might be real. He might actually be carrying out this 4-step plan. Those pictures might be real. And if that's the case, we have a huge problem. Because this plan, if he actually carries it out, is so completely illegal. He can't do this. This is not okay. And so the faction of members on the Discord server that were starting to sense that this 4-step plan of Menhaz's might actually be real began to talk internally, and they said, look, we can't just sit here and do nothing if Menhaz is actually doing this. We have to stop him. This is not okay. And so in fact, one of these members actually contacted their local police and told them, hey, there's this guy on my Discord server, his username is Menhaz, I don't have his actual name, but he's doing something that could be very bad, and you need to look into it. And so the dispatcher said, okay, well, where does Menhaz live? And the person who had called was like, well, I don't actually know. In fact, I really don't know much about him other than the fact that he goes by Menhaz and he sent these crazy pictures that could be real or not, I don't know. And so eventually the dispatcher just said, look, I get it that you're concerned, but we have nothing to go on here. And remember, this is the internet. People make stuff up all the time. And so pretty quickly after that, the police officer just hung up, and that was that. So at this point, Nicole and the other members of the Discord server who were starting to suspect that what Menhaz was doing could be real, they felt really alone. I mean, the local police was not taking this seriously, which did make sense. I mean, they had nothing to go on. But as a result, it was like nobody was doing anything about what Menhaz was claiming. And Nicole and the other members who, again, were beginning to sense this could be real, they felt terrible about just sitting here doing nothing. And so Nicole and a few other members of the Discord server decided to team up digitally and actually investigate Menhaz themselves, try to figure out who this guy is and really what's he up to. And so Nicole and this new investigative group started by combing through all the chat logs in their Discord server to see if Menhaz at any point had either intentionally or unintentionally dropped hints about his real name and his location. And eventually, they came across a message where Menhaz actually said his real first name was Menhaz. That wasn't just his username, that was his real name. And that was great because Menhaz was a pretty unique name. And so Nicole and the group thought, okay, well, if we find where in the world that name is somewhat common, maybe that will give us a rough idea of where to look for Menhaz in the world. They also knew that Menhaz was a college student, or at least he claimed to be. Now, he never actually said where he went to college, but he would often, in the Discord server, tell people when he was going to be on the server and when he was going to be off the server, like for classes and for studying and that kind of thing. He would say, okay, hey, I'll be on at 6 p.m. tonight, or I'll be off at 9, I'll be back on at 8. He would give these specific times, and he would always use Eastern Standard Time when he did that. And so a natural assumption that Nicole and her group made was, okay, very likely Menhaz lives in the Eastern time zone. And that time zone included the entire east coast of the United States, eastern and central Canada, and also some countries in South and Central America. But while that was helpful, it still created too broad of an area in the world for this group to realistically look for Menhaz. It was nearly impossible to actually figure out where he was. But they now had a sense of where he could be, and they thought, okay, well, why don't we ask somebody else in the Discord server if they can try to track Menhaz's IP address? An IP address can be used to find the approximate geographical location of a computer. And sure enough, someone in the server said they could do that, and within a few minutes, they had tracked Menhaz's computer to Toronto, Canada. However, right at the same time they were figuring this out, Menhaz sent a third picture across the Discord server, a picture that showcased him completing step 3 of this 4-step plan, allegedly. And for Nicole and many other members of this Discord server, this third picture really represented a big shift, because now it was getting terrifying. Because look, it seems pretty likely at this point that Menhaz is actually doing this. This is real. How could he possibly have these hyper-specific photos that are perfectly synced with this 4-step plan he had come up with? This feels real. And so Nicole, she actually asked the person who had traced his IP address to Toronto, she said, hey, should we call the Toronto police and tell them what's going on here? Maybe they can go find him and stop him before he completes this plan. I mean, he's apparently completed 3 steps. There's only 1 step left. We have to stop him here. But the person who had tracked his IP address to Toronto said, look, what are the police going to do? There's 6 million people that live in Toronto. And all we have is that maybe his computer is in Toronto and maybe these pictures are real. And also, by the way, it's pretty easy to mask your IP address. You can use something called a VPN or virtual private network that when you track someone's IP address that has one of those working, it will make it seem like their address is, for example, in Toronto or Chicago or New York or Dallas or anywhere in the world, when in reality, their computer is somewhere totally different. And so the police are not going to launch a manhunt based on an IP address. It's not 100% accurate. And so basically, Nicole realized that even though they saw they are on the precipice, potentially, of Menhaz committing some horrible crime, and they can't do anything about it because they don't really have any information about Menhaz. And so at this point, everybody on the Discord server was basically begging Menhaz to come clean. Tell us these photos are fake. Tell us this plan of yours is really just you trolling. But Menhaz didn't do that. He doubled down and said, oh no, these are all real. And in fact, I'm going to complete step 4 of this plan and complete the whole process in 30 minutes. And after that, all Nicole and the other members of the Discord server could do was just try to convince Menhaz not to do this. Don't follow through with this. Don't complete the plan. You gotta stop. It's not worth it. But Menhaz refused and said, I'm doing this no matter what. And sure enough, 30 minutes later, Menhaz would send one final picture, the 4th picture, showcasing that his 4-step plan was now complete. At this point, someone from the Discord server did call the Toronto police. The following day, at about 3:30 p.m., police officers arrived outside of Menhaz's home, which it would turn out was located in a small town just north of Toronto. The IP address had been correct. By this point, it had now been about 24 hours since Menhaz had sent the very first picture of his four-step plan. Police knocked on the front door, having no idea what to expect here. They had seen the images Menhaz had sent on the Discord server, but at this point, until they went inside, they had no idea if they were dealing with a terrible crime or a terrible joke. When the door opened, Menhaz himself was standing in the doorway. He had a totally neutral, very calm expression on his face. He was very gracious. He welcomed the police inside. And when they stepped inside, they asked him, what's going on here? And all Menhaz said was, "You'll see." So the police walked further into the home and eventually made their way upstairs. And when they got up there, they just froze. Because it would turn out Menhaz was not trolling. Those pictures were not fake. He really had carried out that four-step plan. It would turn out, for the past 4 years, Menhaz had been living a double life. To his friends and family, he was a college student studying engineering, and he was on a path to great success, when in reality, he dropped out of college in his first year and just pretended to go to school every day, when in reality, he would just go to a local mall and hang out there, and then in the evenings, when school was over and he would come back home, he would just immerse himself in video games, specifically that Perfect World game. That's what he did. He just went to the mall and played video games and lied to his friends and family. But July 27th, 2019, the day Menhaz put his four-step plan into action, was literally the last day he could maintain this ruse. Because the next day, July 28th, 2019, was the day Menhaz was scheduled to graduate from his college. And so his friends and family were all expecting to be there and to see this amazing ceremony. And so to deal with the fact that his real life and his fake life were about to collide, Menhaz came up with his four-step plan. And he literally told the members of the Discord server about his big plan, but nobody believed him because he was always trolling people. It just seemed like, this is made up, another one of Menhaz's lies, but he was not lying. It was all true. Those pictures that he sent across were absolutely authentic. He took those pictures, and they did represent completing each step in the plan. The first picture was of his mother, the second picture was of his grandmother, the third picture was of his sister, and the fourth picture was of his father. And in each picture, those people were dead. Because Menhaz had spent the day methodically killing his entire family to prevent them finding out about his lie. He hit them over the head with a crowbar and then slit their throats and took a picture, posted it to Discord. By the time someone from Discord finally got in touch with the Toronto police, it was too late. Menhaz had obliterated his entire family. Menhaz ultimately pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years.
We talk like the night would never end, like nothing in us could ever bend. Your laugh still echoes in my head, like you forgot we're already dead. Now the space between us feels too wide, like we were real, but only for a time. I reached back, but nothing stayed.
You showed up late in a red dress glow, just on your heels and a kiss too slow. My name on your lips like a secret prayer. I tried to stay cool, but you knew I was there. Hey, you pull me close, then you slip away. One look from you and I lose my way. Mojar tu nombre, mojar tu...
A quick note about our stories: they are all based on true events, but we sometimes use pseudonyms to protect the people involved, and some details are fictionalized for dramatic purposes.